A rookie sailor broke protocol during a silent drill aboard a U.S. Navy nuclear submarine 700 feet beneath the Atlantic. What happened next didn't just stun the entire crew. It threatened to sink the ship and everyone aboard. Let us know in the comments which branch of the military you admire most. The USS Providence moved silently through the ink-black water, her hull creaking softly under the crushing pressure. Inside, the crew operated with machine-like precision, every movement measured, every breath deliberate. Commander Sullivan stood at the center of the control room, arms folded behind his back, observing with eyes like twin steel traps. He had spent more time underwater than on land. 18 years of combat patrols, silent running drills, and split-second life-or-death decisions had carved him into something more force than man. The crew respected him, feared him, trusted him. Trust was survival down here. At sonar monitoring, Seaman Brooks adjusted his headset nervously. Just 19, fresh from basic, barely 3 months into his first assignment. His hands were slick with sweat inside his gloves. Today was his first silent running drill. No speaking, no unnecessary movements, no actions without direct command. Every sound mattered at these depths. Brooks watched the readings flicker on his console. A small coolant pressure anomaly appeared, minor, harmless. It happened sometimes when the ballast shifted during maneuvers, but to Brooks, it looked wrong. It looked urgent. Panic gnawed at him. His training screamed, report and wait. His instincts screamed, act now or lose everything. He hesitated. Then, driven by fear and youth and a desperate need to prove himself, he reached forward and tapped the manual coolant override. Click. The tiny mechanical sound echoed in the eerie stillness like a shotgun blast. Commander Sullivan's head snapped around. The bridge froze. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then, in one smooth, terrifying motion, Sullivan crossed the deck and loomed over Brooks's station. His voice was ice. "Seaman Brooks," he said quietly. "Did you have authorization to adjust the coolant system?" Brooks swallowed hard. "No, sir," he whispered. "You broke silent protocol," Sullivan said, louder now, so the entire control room could hear. "You violated operational discipline. You compromised the drill." Brooks shrank under the weight of his words. You thought wrong," Sullivan interrupted, his tone scalpel sharp. "You let fear make decisions for you. Fear kills submarines." Without raising his voice, without so much as a shout, Sullivan walked to the control panel and ended the drill. Normal lighting returned. Systems whirred back into normal operation. The exercise was over. The shame remained. Sullivan turned to the officer of the deck. "Log drill compromised. All crew return to duty stations." He fixed Brooks with a stare so cold it could have frozen seawater. "You will report to Chief McAllen for reassignment. Effective immediately." Brooks nodded, throat tight, vision blurring. The four. Walk down the narrow passageways to McAllen's maintenance quarters felt longer than any ocean crossing. Chief McAllen was waiting. A mountain of a man, hands like weathered stone, eyes like twin gun barrels. "Seaman Brooks," he grunted, tossing a grimy clipboard onto a battered metal table. "Congratulations, you're the new maintenance assistant." Brooks stood at attention. "Sir, yes, sir," McAllen snorted. "You'll learn what discipline smells like. Sun, diesel fuel, rust, and the sweat of 1,000 men smarter than you." Brooks didn't flinch. He picked up the clipboard. His punishment began at dawn. The next 2 days were a blur of crawling through ventilation shafts, replacing busted gaskets, cleaning sludge traps and scrubbing corroded pipe joints. No glamour, no glory, no thanks. Just sweat, pain, humility. The senior crew didn't mock him. That would have been too easy. They ignored him, which hurt worse. In the mess, Brooks sat alone. In the corridors, they passed him without a glance. He had broken their trust, and down here, under 1,000 tons of black water, trust was more valuable than oxygen. At night, lying awake in his narrow bunk, he replayed his mistake over and over again, dissecting it, reliving it, suffocating under it. And he vowed, silently, fiercely, that if the chance ever came again, he would not hesitate. He would be better. He would earn his place, no matter what it cost. 3 days had passed since Seaman Brooks's mistake nearly derailed the silent drill. 3 days of endless maintenance duties, silent glares, and the heavy, crushing sense that he was a ghost aboard the USS Providence. But ghosts could still learn, and Brooks was learning fast. Under the brutal tutelage of Chief McAllen, he crawled through the guts of the submarine, learned the hiss of a leaking valve before it became critical, memorized the vibration patterns of overworked pumps, could spot a dangerous pressure imbalance by sound alone. He learned the heartbeat of the Providence, and slowly, silently, he became part of it. Meanwhile, above and around them, the ocean shifted. The mission was simple on paper: shadow a foreign naval exercise, gather intel, avoid detection. But the Atlantic was a living thing, unpredictable, restless. Currents battered the Providence from below, forcing constant course corrections. Electrical storms raged across the surface, cutting off satellite contact. And the sonar team began picking up strange echoes in the deep. Commander Sullivan tightened procedures. Silent running became the default. Active sonar was forbidden. Every crew member was reminded, one mistake could bring death, not embarrassment. The atmosphere aboard thickened. Conversations became clipped. Laughter disappeared. The crew moved through the halls with a hunted caution, eyes flickering constantly toward sonar screens and depth gauges. Brooks noticed it too. Working late one night, elbow deep in a coolant manifold, he caught sight of Lieutenant Brandt frowning at the main sonar console, muttering under his breath. At first, Brooks said nothing. He was still the lowest man on the totem pole, still rebuilding what little trust he had left. But something gnawed at him. The same instinct that had betrayed him during the drill, but now tempered by discipline and experience. He approached carefully. "Sir," he said quietly. "Problem." Brandt looked up sharply, then, seeing it was Brooks, relaxed. Maybe not relaxed, but acknowledged. "Intermittent contact," Brandt said, tapping the screen. "Could be nothing. Could be a ghost." Brooks leaned in, careful not to touch anything. The echo was faint, barely more than a ripple. But it moved. Against the current. A real object, tracking them. Not close enough to confirm visually, not close enough to ping without giving away their position, but there, watching, waiting. Commander Sullivan was notified immediately. He entered the control room like a storm cloud, silent, heavy, electric. He studied the data for a long time, then said, "Maintain course, maintain speed." Brandt hesitated. "Sir, if it's hostile, Sullivan said. "We don't blink first." Brooks stood at his post, heart pounding. He wanted to run, he wanted to hide, but he stayed. The Providence continued her crawl through the Atlantic Trench. Silent, invisible, or so they hoped. The next day brought more tension. The contact grew bolder. Brooks watched the sonar readings tighten, barely perceptible shifts, but shifts nonetheless. The other vessel, whatever it was matching their speed, matching their course. Staying just outside visual range, Sullivan ordered simulated evasion maneuvers, minor course changes, depth shifts, but the shadow stayed with them, like a hunter waiting for a mistake. Brooks spent his off-shift time studying damage control manuals, learning everything he could about emergency power reroutes, bulkhead isolation, life support backups. Knowledge was armor now. Knowledge was survival. That night, the hammer finally fell. At 0300, just as Brooks was cycling through a secondary battery, inspection, the Providence shuddered, not violently, subtly, like a ripple through steel. Klaxons did not blare. Lights did not flash. But the experienced sailors knew. Impact. Somewhere aft. Brooks dropped his tools and sprinted toward the central corridor, heartbeat hammering in his ears. Collision, he heard McAllen bark over the emergency comms. Possible. Contact with undersea debris, came Hensley's voice from sonar. Tight, controlled. Or, he didn't finish the thought, or the shadow had struck. Commander Sullivan's voice cut across the commnet, cold and commanding. All hands, damage control teams report. Secure compartments, maintain silent running. Brooks grabbed an emergency toolkit and joined the flow of sailors surging toward the aft compartments. Steam hissed from ruptured pipe seams. The air tasted of metal and electricity, but the real damage wasn't obvious. It was deeper. Power fluctuation warnings blinked red across multiple decks. Coolant flow was down 12%. Backup hydraulic systems offline in sections 8 through 11, minor. On the surface, but dangerous if pushed. Brooks worked like a man possessed, patching leaks, rerouting relays, sealing microfractures. Hours blurred. When he finally staggered back toward the auxiliary control station, hands blistered and uniform. Soaked with coolant, he found Commander Sullivan waiting. "You," Sullivan said, voice low. "With me, no questions." Brooks followed. Sullivan led him into a cramped emergency briefing alcove, away from prying eyes. He gestured toward a tactical map of the trench. "Tell me what you see," Sullivan said. Brooks swallowed hard, studying the screen. The Providence was here, marked in green. The shadow, still unconfirmed, was trailing. Ahead, the trench narrowed sharply like a bottleneck. Escape would be difficult, and the hunter knew it. Brooks spoke carefully. "They're herding us, sir." Sullivan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Correct," he said. "Options?" Brooks thought fast. "We can double back," he said. "Try to slip past while they expect us to run forward." Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "Double back into a blind trench?" Brooks hesitated. "Better than walking into a kill zone, sir." For a long, terrible second, Sullivan just stared at him. Then he turned to the bridge comm. "Prepare for emergency course reversal," he said calmly. The Providence shifted. Silent, stealthy, deadly. The hunter, caught flat-footed, hesitated. Sonar flared, movement, confusion. And for the first time, the enemy broke contact. The Providence slipped into a hidden side ravine, deeper and darker than any trench they had mapped. Safe. For now. Later, standing in the dim mess hall, exhausted and shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline, Brooks found himself face to face with Commander Sullivan. Again. "You made a mistake," Sullivan said quietly, voice devoid of anger. "But you learned from it." Brooks nodded, throat dry. "And you trusted yourself when it mattered," Sullivan said. "Not because you were fearless, because you were prepared." He clapped Brooks once, just once, on the shoulder. That's how sailors survive. Brooks stood there long after the commander left, not smiling, not celebrating, just breathing, steady, solid, ready. The USS Providence drifted in absolute darkness, hidden in the folds of an unmapped ravine, hundreds of feet below the ocean's surface. Silent, invisible, breathing with the pulse of 1,000 hearts beating as one. But the hunter hadn't given up. Commander Sullivan watched the sonar readings like a hawk, arms folded behind his back, jaw clenched in a hard line. Brooks manned the auxiliary sonar console, tension thrumming through every nerve. The faint ping of active sonar washed over them. Once, twice. Someone out there was searching, aggressively. It wasn't just about hurting them anymore. It was about killing them. Commander Sullivan made his decision. "We stay cold," he said. "No counterping, no active defense. We let them believe we're dead." The crew obeyed without question, engines powered. Down to idle, environmental systems cut to bare minimums, internal lighting dimmed to ghost levels. The Providence became a rock, a shadow among shadows, but even rocks can crack under enough pressure. 2 hours later, it happened. A low thud reverberated through the hull. Not a collision, not direct, a shockwave. Depth. Charge. Brooks stiffened at his console as the vibrations rolled through the ship. Another thud. Closer, then a third. The enemy was bracketing them, blindly but methodically. "If they get a lucky hit," Brandt muttered. Commander Sullivan's voice cut across the room like a scalpel. "We make our own luck." He turned to the chief of the boat. "Prepare countermeasures. No release until my order." Brooks wiped sweat from his forehead. The walls seemed to close in. The air grew thicker. Another explosion rocked the hull, this time close enough to flicker the emergency lighting. Small alarms blipped on Brooks' panel. Minor hull stress fractures. Manageable. For now, but not forever. Commander Sullivan moved to Brooks' station, speaking low. "Report." Brooks scanned the readouts with shaking but disciplined hands. "Stress fractures in sectors 4 and 7. Minor. Internal systems holding." Sullivan nodded once. Brooks risked a glance at him. Calm, steady, unbreakable. The kind of man who didn't just teach discipline. He was discipline. The kind Brooks now understood wasn't about being fearless. It was about acting despite fear. The next charge struck closer. Lights cut out for half a second. Panels sparked. Brooks's console flared red with warnings. "Coolant leak, Sector 7, he barked instinctively. Before Sullivan could even issue the order, Brooks was on his feet, toolkit in hand, sprinting down the narrow, swaying corridors toward the source. The world became chaos. Steam spewed from ruptured pipes. Bulkheads groaned. The smell of burning insulation filled the air. Brooks reached the damaged sector. A high-pressure coolant line had ruptured, spraying scalding mist into the compartment. One slip here could flood the reactor chamber, or worse. No time for doubt. Brooks dove into the cloud, hands moving blindly. He found the emergency cutoff valve and twisted with everything he had. It resisted. The metal burned through his gloves, searing his palms. He gritted his teeth and twisted harder. The valve gave with a shriek of tortured steel. Pressure dropped. Mist cleared. Systems stabilized. Brooks collapsed against the bulkhead, gasping, hands raw and blistered, but alive. Alive because he hadn't frozen. Alive because he knew what needed to be done, and did it. Back on the bridge, Commander Sullivan watched him return, bloody, battered but upright, and simply nodded. Approval. Respect. No words needed. The next minutes were a blur. The Hunter sub launched another depth charge, but this time, Commander Sullivan was ready. "Deploy countermeasures," he ordered. Brooks manned the emergency controls. Small pods, essentially noisemakers and decoys, fired from the Providence's silent tubes, spreading a web of false echoes in every direction. The ocean bloomed with confusion. For the first time, the enemy hesitated. Commander Sullivan seized the moment. "Emergency ascent," he barked. "Flank speed, 30 degrees up angle." The Providence surged upward like a wounded beast fighting for the surface. The enemy fired, torpedo in the water. Brooks saw it light up the sonar screen like a spear of death, but it struck a decoy, detonating in a blinding flare of energy well. Away from the sub, the shockwave still hit them, hard. Brooks was thrown against his console. Sparks showered from overhead panels, but the ship held. Steel groaned, beams buckled, but she held. At 200 feet, they leveled off. Silence. Stillness. Brooks sat at his station, trembling with exhaustion as the enemy's sonar pings grew fainter. Farther. Gone. Hunter had missed its prey. Commander Sullivan stood tall in the middle of the bridge, face carved from stone. He turned slowly to the crew. "You held," he said simply. "You held when it counted. No speech, no ceremony. Just the simple, crushing truth. Under pressure that would have broken lesser men, they endured, and they won. Later, as the Providence drifted quietly toward a rendezvous point for extraction, Commander Sullivan found Brooks sitting alone in the auxiliary maintenance bay, nursing his bandaged hands. He didn't speak at first, just stood there watching. Then he said, "You're not here because you're perfect." Brooks looked up. "You're here because when it mattered, you didn't think about yourself. You thought about the ship, about the crew." He crouched down, voice low and firm. "And that, Seaman Brooks, is the only kind of sailor I trust beneath 1,000 feet of water." Brooks nodded slowly. No pride, no arrogance, just a deep, steady understanding. A bond earned in fire and steel. The USS Providence floated silently at periscope depth, her bruised hull bearing the scars of the battle beneath the Atlantic. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Not relaxed, never that, but alive. Breathing. The tension that had once choked every corridor now hummed with a different energy. Pride, earned not through victory songs or medals, but through survival, raw and unvarnished. Commander Sullivan stood alone in the forward observation blister, staring into the endless dark water. Behind him, footsteps approached. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. "Seaman Brooks," he said, voice calm. "Sir," Brooks answered, standing stiffly at attention. "Relax," Sullivan said without looking back. Brooks shifted slightly, unsure if he could. Sullivan let the silence stretch a moment longer, then spoke. "You ever wonder why we drill silent running until you think your bones might snap from the tension?" he asked. Brooks hesitated. "Because one sound, one mistake, can kill us all," he said carefully. Sullivan smiled faintly. "That's the technical answer," he said. "The real reason is simpler." He turned, facing Brooks fully. "It's because discipline under pressure is the only thing stronger than fear." Brooks held his gaze. "You faced fear down there," Sullivan said. "And you didn't let it own you." He stepped closer. "You used it, controlled it. You acted not for yourself, but for this crew." Brooks's throat tightened. He didn't speak, didn't trust himself to. Sullivan continued, "You'll make mistakes again. Everyone does, even me." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "But what matters is what you do after the mistake. Whether you hide behind it or rise above it." He clasped Brooks's shoulder firmly. "You rose." Brooks stood straighter, taller, the way a real sailor stands, a real man. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. Sullivan nodded once. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank the ocean." Brooks frowned slightly. "The ocean?" he asked. Sullivan's smile widened, just a touch. "The ocean doesn't care about your excuses. It doesn't care about your fears. It cares only if you're ready." He leaned in slightly. "And out here, readiness is the only currency that counts." Brooks absorbed the words, etched them into his bones. In the days that followed, as the Providence limped back towards safe waters, the crew pulled together like never before. Every busted panel was repaired, every system restored, every wounded sailor tended. Brooks found himself working alongside men who had barely acknowledged his existence before. McAllen barked less. Hensley grumbled less. Even Lieutenant Brandt clapped him once on the shoulder without saying a word. Acceptance wasn't handed out down here. It was earned. And Brooks had earned it. On their final night before surfacing, the crew gathered unofficially. In the mess hall, no speeches, no formalities, just coffee, laughter, tired smiles. Commander Sullivan entered, carrying a battered old naval pennant. He pinned it to the wall. The fabric was faded, torn at the edges, but the words embroidered across, it burned into every heart present, Fortitude Invincimus. By endurance, we conquer. No one spoke. No one needed to. When the Providence finally broke the surface, battered but unbroken, the crew lined the decks, breathing fresh air for the first time in weeks. Seaman Brooks stood among them, not the boy, who had once panicked at a flickering coolant light. Not the rookie who had broken protocol and nearly cost lives, but the sailor who had fought, endured, and proven himself worthy of the uniform he wore. As the first rays of dawn lit the horizon, Commander Sullivan stepped up beside him. "You did well, Brooks," he said simply. Brooks nodded. "Learned from the best, sir," he said. Sullivan smiled faintly. "No," he said. "You learned from the sea, same as the rest of us." The two men stood together, gazing out over the endless expanse of water, not teacher and student, not commander and subordinate, but sailors, brothers, survivors. On land, mistakes are lessons. Underwater, mistakes are death sentences. Seaman Brooks didn't become a hero because he was fearless. He became one because he faced fear and chose discipline instead. Because he understood that survival wasn't about strength or speed or even courage. It was about readiness. It was about the hard, relentless work of being better than you were the day before. It was about standing your ground when every instinct screamed at you to run. And in the cold, crushing dark of the Atlantic, it was the only thing that mattered. If you were trapped, deep beneath the ocean, outnumbered, hunted, your life depending on a single choice, would you have had the discipline to hold steady? Tell us in the comments below. We want to hear your story. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of the strength it takes to survive in a world that shows no mercy, make sure to subscribe to Authority Watch. More powerful. Stories of courage, loyalty, and survival are coming. Until next time, stay ready, stay strong, stay disciplined.